We have here a Insignia Blu Ray, DVD, and net web streaming player produced by Insignia, which is basically Best Buy's in-house brand. These were one of the first units, set-top boxes out that could do streaming Netflix. So for the price, it was a streaming box plus Blu-ray, which at the time for $100 pop for the wired Ethernet version and $150 for the one with the built-in Wi-Fi. That was a steal, considering at the time a Roku was $100 for a very basic model back then. Original ship date on these was about July 2009, and functionality was actually ended up being really limited, and they never actually really produced much of anything. They ended up only giving us Netflix, Pandora, and a very expensive streaming movie rental service, which was like $10 to stream a friggin' movie. Well, suffice to say, back then Blu-ray discs were also very expensive. I never bought any until 2016. Now that the prices on them are down, Gino had to have Ghostbusters, and I figured, oh, what the heck, I got a 4K TV, even though this is 1080p, it's going to look awesome, and it does. But one problem these units inherently have is the Blu-ray / DVD ROM drives had a lot of issues. They would get dirty, and materials were relatively cheap. The discs had a lot of slippage, and considering this one sat in the garage for a number of years because we upgraded to a Roku, so yeah, this one has that hereditary problem. So we're going to open it up. Actually, it's really easy to service this. There's 2 screws on each side, and then there's 4 screws in the back. Just take those out, Phillips head screwdriver. They come out 1, 2, 3, no security bits, nothing. Piece of cake. So we just open this up, pull it back gently, and then lift up. And that's it. So you get the main power board here. There's your mains coming in. We got power going to the front USB port, which was for the Blu-ray Live or something when it went online. Never tried that before. Under here is your main processor or GPU, whatever they use. I can tell you this gets extremely hot. That's another part of the problem with these units, is the heatsink was way too small. But it's still functional, but I'll touch on that in a moment. Now, the majority of the problem is going to be inside the ROM drive. Now, you got this cover going over it, and if you had a disc in here, you could actually see part of the disc in the tray. But we don't, because that's a stupid idea to do when you're taking a ROM drive apart. So, remove the 2 silver screws holding that top tray, top part down. And then you have little pressure tabs on the side. If you don't have a flat, or if you don't have a screwdriver or something to press on them, you could use possibly a key. Be very gentle though. Do one side. Once you do one side like that, the other side just kind of pops right off. Now what you want to do, now mine's already done, but you want to have some cotton swab and some alcohol. Wrong kind of alcohol, I'm talking about like isopropyl alcohol. And what you want to do is put some on your cotton swab and use that cotton swab to swipe off this little round part up here. If any kind of greasiness got on there, this part presses down on the disc from the top down to help apply pressure to the little, when the motor comes up. Next, on the, I guess, spindle, I really have no idea what you call it specifically, there is a really poorly designed rubber pad that goes around it. There's a few different options you can do, and what happens is that top layer of the pad, and it's not just in this Insignia player, it happens to a lot of them. I know the old Cyberhome DVD players, which were one of the cheapest DVD players ever on the market, at the time when DVD players, a good one was maybe $150. You could pick up a Cyber Home, which were awesome and easily to region hack, just like this thing, for $30. Yeah, that was unheard of a DVD player. And you know what? That worked better than any of them I ever used. So anyways, there's that rubber pad that's on here. And the problem is it dries out. And once that dries out on the top, it no longer grips the disc. And the motor's going to start turning, but the disc is just going to keep slipping. And as it slips, it also wobbles a little bit. And since it can never get up to its correct RPM, the laser and the Blu Ray laser cannot read the disc. So, a few different things. One, that works pretty decently, but it's not a real good permanent solution, I found, was contact cement or rubber cement. What you do is you just put a thin layer around, and just, I mean, really thin, and then let it dry for a couple of days. I know it's dry overnight, but it could be dry, better if you leave it dry for a few days. Another one that works great is if you can spread, and even better, now the rubber cement or contact cement is not a permanent solution. It will eventually wear off onto your discs, but if you're just in a hurry and you have something important you gotta play for the family, just shut the kids up. It's a great temporary solution. Silicon caulk, extremely thin layer, and I mean really thin, and then let it dry for a few days. That is pretty much a permanent solution. It's not going to rub off on your discs, but make sure it is a extremely thin layer. Otherwise, if it's too much, the disc's going to be off, and as it's spinning, it's going to wobble. It might scratch the you might have scratched the disc from the wobble. Option number 3 I found is I was actually able to peel the top layer of that rubber pad off, and underneath it was still a very tacky, and it's not the glue, it literally is the rubber they used. It was a very tacky material under there, so I kept that on there. Once you do that, take a dry cotton swab and gently swabby out your lasers if they appear dirty. You got the real tiny one is the Blu Ray, and the big one here is the DVD, the red laser for the DVD. Once you're done, you can replace the cover here, gently, of course. Get your 2 screws. Now, if you're not comfortable or you've never worked around electronics before, I recommend using a screwdriver instead of a cordless power tool. I have zero patience, and I've worked with plenty of electronics before. If you do use a corded tool or cordless, screw gun, don't over tighten. Just get it, get the majority of the screwing in, and then hand snug it. Don't have to crank it, just snug it. Now, another thing I'm going to touch on, that should fix your playback issue. Now, another thing I found doesn't happen so much with the DVDs, but it happens considerably with Blu Ray discs due to the higher bit rate. A DVD max bit rate's 10 megabit at the highest, but a Blu Ray disc I've seen as high as 40 megabit, depending on the length of the movie and quality of the picture. There's a lot of processing done by the CPU, and considering the age of the unit, this thing runs hot. I'm really surprised they didn't put a fan on it. In fact, my thermal camera had this well over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 100 degrees Celsius, roughly. Personally, either they should have went with a larger heatsink or added some sort of fan inside this case. At the moment, I've been playing the Blu-ray discs with the cover off, and no issue. As soon as I put the cover back on with the reduced airflow in the case, I noticed that about halfway through a movie, it would start to skip and jump, even though the disc was turning just fine. And if I stopped, let it cool down, I could resume it right where it left off and was skipping and finish the movie, no problem. So I'm going to figure out either, I'm going to put some better heatsink paste on here, but I mean, this literally gets hot enough where you cannot touch it for more than a split second. That it's pretty hot. So I'm believing that the processor or GPU that they're using is potentially overheating and then having to throttle down a bit, and at that point your movie will start to skip. I suppose another solution would be you could pause the movie for a few minutes, maybe let everything cool down a bit and then resume it again. But I think either a small 12-volt case fan, there's plenty of space in here, or a 5-volt one you could tap into the USB. USB's down here. There's actually a whole nother second set here that you could tap a USB into. It was probably something for some way they probably used some sort of USB chip based Wi-Fi chip in these units. So that's about it. Put your cover back on if you so desire and call it a day. You now should have a working Insignia Blu Ray drive or Blu Ray player. And don't get me wrong, even though there were some shortcomings on these units, the image quality really was phenomenal from these units. Very impressive, actually. So that's it. Have a good night. Smile, cheese.